New Orleans, 1728. A ship arrives in the dark of night carrying young women with skin so pale it seems translucent, and each clutching a coffin-shaped trunk. Days later, the first body appears, completely drained of blood. In this episode, we'll answer the question of why the locals still won't walk past the Ursuline Convent after midnight, and why the Vatican keeps its third floor permanently sealed. I'm Carol Ann, and welcome to the In-Between. The year is 1728 in the relatively new city of New Orleans in French-held territory. New Orleans has a decent-sized population. Problem is, they're all men, and pretty rowdy ones at that. So the King of France, desperate to get a real colony going, sends over a group of young women as potential brides for the men. The plan is that the girls would marry the residents of the colony, start families, not only to settle down the current bad boy population, but also to kickstart the colony population. As the women step off the boat after 3 months at sea, the men are not impressed. The girls look anemic and sickly as they file out from below deck and off the ship. The plan is for them to be sheltered and protected by the Ursuline nuns, a local convent, until suitable marriage matches can be made. So the girls, each having a large, heavy trunk or casket filled with all their worldly possessions and anything else they need to start a new life and a new family, are taken to the convent, and their trunks are taken to the building's third floor attic for safekeeping. The nuns are told that the trunks are to remain closed until each girl is married. But it doesn't take long before strange things start happening around the city. People go missing. Others are found drained of blood. But the Holy Spirit must have been whispering in the ears of the nuns because they decide to go check out those trunks sitting up in their attic. They march upstairs, open them up, and are perplexed to find them all empty. No clothes, no keepsakes, no Tupperware canister sets waiting to go up on the shelves of their new pantries. Just empty. Well, what did they bring them for? Or maybe the question is, who? The nuns freak out, afraid that they have just been a party to the smuggling of vampires from the old world by way of these trunks. Or maybe it's the girls themselves that are the monsters. Either way, the nuns wait until night, when the vampires are most likely out on one of their nightly feeding runs, run around blessing the building and nailing shut the third floor shutters with nails blessed by the Pope himself, in the hope the vampires will now be trapped outside and perish in the morning sun. And should you visit the Ursuline Convent, which still stands on the corner of Chartres Street and Ursuline Avenue today, you will see those third floor shutters closed. However, the nuns have moved out. The building's now a museum, and should you take the museum tour, the third floor is off limits. Rumor has it that when Hurricane Katrina blew on through, it took one of the shutters with it, forcing Vatican officials to scramble to repair the damage. Today, it has become the main stop on any good vampire tour of the city. Just be aware that the locals don't even think of walking past it between midnight and 6 a.m. What do they know that we don't? So that is the legend of the Casket Girls. But is it true? Well, like all good legends, there certainly is enough truth in it to qualify it as faction and not 100% fiction. But the best part is that this story is giving us the rare opportunity to debunk some of the debunkers. Does that make it real? No, but it's more real than some people would have you believe. And New Orleans still has a few tricks up her sleeve today. So let's start from the beginning and figure out where this awesome legend came from. To understand the Casket Girls, we first need to understand early New Orleans. Quick history. In 1682, a French explorer by the name of De La Salle makes his way all the way down the Mississippi River south to the Gulf of America, looks back north, says, excuse me, to all the Chitimacha Indians standing around him and says, I claim this land for King Louis XIV, the King of France. So now Louis wants to do something with that land. The British and the Spanish are already in the New World, so he doesn't want to miss out. He sends a couple of brothers to scope it out. First, they put up a fort that would eventually become Mobile, Alabama, the first capital of the Louisiana Territory. But then one of the brothers finds an even better place, one that's right on the Mississippi. He has the perfect spot right on the riverbend. Although why he didn't pick this bend or this bend or this bend, I have no idea. But regardless, a new capital of the Louisiana Territory is founded in 1718 called Nouveau Orleans, after the Duke of Orleans, which we now know as New Orleans. Okay, we now have an official colony with a settlement being built on high ground that would become today's French Quarter. Only one problem. Its entire population is soldiers, miners, and fur traders. Oh, and convicts. The 1700s were pretty popular for European countries sending convicts anywhere outside of Europe. So France joined right in and sent their less than desirables to New Orleans as labor to help build up the new colony. Okay, so we have all these men roaming around and no women in sight. Except those Chitimacha women over there. Ha ha ha. Being the fun-loving guys that they are, the colonists start trying to spend some quality time with the local girls. That went over with the tribal elders about as well as you can imagine. So King Louis has a problem. He has a colony and no way to grow it. He needs women, specifically respectable French women who could marry these men, create families, and transform this rough settlement into a proper city worthy of the French Empire. So he thinks, I'll just send over some girls. Might sound funny, but it wouldn't be the first time he's done it. Back in the 1660s and 1670s, the colony of New France, what we now know as Quebec, had the same problem as New Orleans. A new colony and no way to grow it. So King Louis had an idea that became known as the Filles du Roi, or King's Daughters. Between 1663 and 1673, he sends about 800 highly virtuous young women aged between 12 and 25 from France to Quebec, each carrying a letter of recommendation from her parish priest, and their passage is paid for by King Louis XIV himself.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Works like a charm. About 737 of these women get married and start families, dramatically increasing the population and contributing to the success of New France. That experiment worked so well that in 1704, Louis figures he'll try the same trick in New Orleans and send another boat of women and drops them off in Mobile, Alabama. And it works, to a degree. The refined ladies that arrive are not exactly thrilled with the horrible living conditions and get a little rebellious. But the governor, Jean-Baptiste Lemoyne du Bienville, my French is atrocious, the founder of New Orleans, sends another letter home to France asking for more. However, word must have gotten back to the French mainland that the Southern Territory is not exactly a picnic. Actually, it's a swampy, disease-ridden quasi-settlement barely clinging to survival. So therein lies the challenge. What woman in her right mind would voluntarily leave the relative comfort and civilization of France to spend 3 months on a boat in squalor conditions to sail across the Atlantic only to marry a stranger in a disease-ridden swamp? Turns out, not many. The only women who volunteer are women whose lives aren't great anyway. So they're not the docile, gentle Filles du Roi. These women are much tougher and not necessarily France's finest. More like party girls, who then hook up with the resident party boys. Not really the best recipe for building families. Bienville then hires a company called the Mississippi Company to go find more girls. The Mississippi Company decides it's just going to do whatever it needs to do to get the job done. They basically comb the streets for any girls who won't be missed and throw them on the boat. Between 1704 and 1721, when the Mississippi Company goes out of business, thank God, several shipments of brides are received between New Orleans, Biloxi, and Mobile, somewhere in the neighborhood of like 1,000 girls. By 1728, the Mississippi Company is no longer a player, but the colony is still struggling. Bienville's successor, Etienne Perrier, asks again for more brides. And all of that brings us to our Casket Girls, though they're not known yet by that name. They are a group, sometimes called the Baleen Brides, named after the ship Les Baleines, French for the whale, that brought them to the New World in 1728. These young women come from the Hôpital Général de la Salpêtrière in Paris. Now, don't let the impeccable French accent fool you. This is not a fancy place. It's not even a hospital. This is a place where they stuff the women they don't want to deal with, imprison there for offenses ranging from witchcraft and Protestantism to insanity, immoral speech, poisoning, murder, and debauchery. Conditions there are horrific. From this grim institution, a group of young women are selected, primarily orphans aged 14 to 17, to sail to Louisiana. Each girl is given a small trunk called a casket, later anglicized to casket, containing a trousseau of clothing, linens, needles, thread, stuff like that. Things that a young girl needs to start her new life in the colony. The journey across the Atlantic is awful. These women spend months in cramped, dark, damp quarters with very little privacy. Fire hazards mean no candles or lanterns at night, so they spend hours in complete blackness. Their meals consist of tiny portions of biscuits, vegetable soups, and salted meats. Not exactly a recipe for health on such a long trip. Even fresh water is scarce. Not to mention that they spend most of the daylight hours below deck anyway, with minimal exposure to sunlight. Because remember, in the 18th century, women on a ship were bad luck. Plus, the sailors themselves become a problem after that many weeks at sea. So many of the girls find it best to just stay out of the way. So it's not a big surprise that when they finally arrive in the New World, they look sickly, pale, and weak. Some may have gotten tuberculosis along the way, making them cough up blood, a detail that could later feed into vampire legends. Contrary to popular belief, these girls don't hit land in New Orleans. They come ashore in Biloxi, where they are taken into the care of the Ursuline nuns, and eventually, most make their way to New Orleans, with the exception of those the nuns are able to marry off along the way. These brave women would eventually become known as the Casket Girls, the filles à la cassette, named for the small trunks containing their possessions. Over time, as the English word casket evolved to become synonymous with coffin, the name would take on darker connotations, feeding the vampire legends that would eventually surround them. Now, let's stop there for a minute and talk about the Ursuline nuns, our ruler-wielding, stalwart defenders against the undead. How did they get mixed up in this adventure? Well, by about 1725, New Orleans is still pretty dang unruly. The new king of France, King Louis XV, having just turned a whopping 15 years old, decides he needs to do more to get control of the out-of-control New Orleans. So he requests that nuns be sent from France to establish a convent in New Orleans, hoping they would bring some semblance of order to the chaotic city. 7 brave Ursuline nuns embark on what is supposed to be a 3-month voyage,
a 3-hour tour
that turned into a grueling 5-month ordeal. Their mission was noble:
We're on a mission from God.
to care for the sick and to establish schools for young girls in the colony. When they finally get to New Orleans in 1727, they find out that their convent isn't even done yet. So they rent some space in one of the larger homes in the French Quarter and wait, presumably with the Casket girls and their caskets in tow. The first convent is completed in 1734. The nuns, who are, for the most part, known as being seen rarely and heard from even more rarely, must have been unusually excited to be moving into their forever home because they even threw a parade. Okay, well, not exactly a parade, more like a procession. But still, for them, that's relatively rowdy. Too bad the honeymoon doesn't last. They find out at some point that their forever home is built on swampland. As the floors begin to sink and the walls shift,
It sank into the swamp. So,
they are forced to abandon it in 1745. The next Ursuline Convent, the one on Chartres Street, isn't completed until 1752. But unlike the last one, this one is still standing. Now here's what I find interesting. Most places I went to for research on the Casket Girls legend had pretty much the same legend story, but then went on to debunk that legend by claiming the girls got here in 1721 and the nuns didn't get here until 1727, with their convent that supposedly houses all of the caskets not being built until 1752. The timeline doesn't add up, therefore the legend is fake. Except that's not true. According to History of Louisiana by Charles Gaillard, written in 1854, so not long after said events, the Casket girls got there in 1728 and were handed over to the nuns for safekeeping. So that does put us one step closer to the true side of the scale. But there is still the idea that the convent that is supposed to house the caskets to this day wasn't built until 24 years after the Casket girls had arrived. What did they do with the trunks before that? Let's say that the nuns found out about the vampires early on and take control of the caskets so the vampires have no homes. What did they do with them before 1734 when the first convent is finished? Or again in 1752 when the current convent was finished? Of course, it's not impossible that they would just factor in those extra storage space needs when they were looking for a temporary rental. But if that's the case, don't you think the Mother Superior would have a come to Jesus meeting with the Archbishop, letting him know what they are storing, and have the Archbishop put a rush on a new place? And if they don't know about the caskets early on, most of the women would be long out and married by the time the nuns get to the second convent in 1752, so there wouldn't be any caskets to store. However, remember that procession they had walking to the new convent? Well, there are some who speculate that there were darker intentions. Rumor has it there were long boxes at the end of the procession, and that the nuns held the procession, which was maybe more like a parade complete with children dressed as angels, because they knew everyone would be looking at them. Seeing them at all was such a rare sight that no one would be paying attention to anything else like the long boxes they were bringing with them. Kind of like hiding something in plain sight. And what about those permanently sealed attic windows that feature so prominently in the vampire legend? The third floor of the Ursuline Convent does indeed have windows that remain shuttered at all times. During storms, these shutters have occasionally blown open, only to be quickly closed again. Some claim to have spotted faces in those attic windows, while others report feeling unseen eyes watching them from above. Wondering if there's any way to find out what's in that attic? Well, author Merida Woywood Crandall, who wrote the book New Orleans Vampires, is one of the few people outside the church who has actually been up there. According to Crandall, the attic wasn't being used for storage as much as you might think. Instead, it contained 6 bedrooms, originally built to house orphans. And there was one more room in the attic, the only one with brick floors rather than wood floors. This darker, smaller space had heavy chains hanging from a beam in the ceiling, and it was accessed through a Dutch door. which is a door where the top half can open while the bottom half stays closed. When Crandall asked about this unusual room, her tour guide explained that it wasn't for vampires, it was for the mentally ill. In the convent's early days, people with mental illnesses were sometimes kept in this room. The brick floor made it easier to clean bodily fluids, the chains were there for restraint, and the Dutch door allowed nuns to pass food and necessities to the occupants without having to jeopardize their safety by opening the door and having to go all the way inside. Although entirely creepy on its own, it would explain the faces some people would see in the windows. These might all stem from the tragic treatment of mentally ill patients rather than undead predators. So how did these historical figures, young women seeking better lives, and nuns dedicated to education and healthcare become entangled with vampire lore? The answer could be that it was just a perfect storm of circumstances. The first would be the 19th century explosion of interest in vampire stories, spurred by works like John Polidori's The Vampire from 1819 and eventually Bram Stoker's Dracula from 1897. This literary trend created a cultural fascination with the undead that permeated society. As the legend of the Casket Girls spread, elements from these vampire narratives began intertwining with their story. The name itself, Casket Girls, took on new meaning as the English word casket shifted to become primarily associated with coffins rather than storage trunks. The girls' appearance upon arrival, pale, sickly, possibly coughing blood from tuberculosis contracted during the voyage, mirrored descriptions of vampires or their victims. Their arrival at night, which is not at all unusual, was just one more box the vampire hunters could check off. And New Orleans is like the perfect backdrop for these kinds of legends to take root. The city's unique melting pot of cultures, French, Spanish, African, Caribbean, bring together diverse spiritual and occult traditions. Voodoo, Catholicism, and folk beliefs all mixed together, creating fertile ground for supernatural tales. Not to mention the high mortality rate in early New Orleans due to yellow fever, malaria, and other diseases meant that death was everywhere for no reason anyone could understand. Modern medicine, with its understanding of disease transmission, wasn't a thing. So a mysterious illness that drained life from its victims could easily be attributed to supernatural causes. Today, this vampire connection continues to thrive in New Orleans culture. The city embraces its reputation as a haven for the undead. According to a 2017 study by then Louisiana State University doctoral candidate John Edgar Browning, at least 50 self-identified real vampires called New Orleans home, and he estimates about 5,000 across the U.S. The city even has its own New Orleans Vampire Association, people who claim to have a medical condition requiring them to consume blood to sustain themselves. Vampire tours are among the most popular attractions in the French Quarter, and the Ursuline Convent remains a highlight of these nocturnal excursions. The legend of the Casket Girls is a perfect origin story for the city's vampiric reputation, a tale with just enough historical truth to make the supernatural elements tantalizingly plausible. But don't think for a second that we are even close to being done. This is the legend that keeps on giving. One of the craziest reports, though wholly unsubstantiated, is the story of two reporters in the 1970s who want to know the truth about those third-floor shutters. So they get themselves comfortable and have a stakeout in their car, parked right outside the fence with a direct view, cameras trained on the third floor. Hours pass by, but evidently the coffee wasn't strong enough because they must have fallen asleep. They don't see the third floor's shutters, the same shutters that are supposed to be nailed shut by the blessed nails, open and shut, and open and shut. The recording cameras whirl to a stop as the scene fades to black. The next morning, the bodies of the investigators were found, ripped open and drained of blood. Another encounter comes from the spring of 2020. An extended family is on vacation in New Orleans for a long weekend. They're at a restaurant when one of the women, Angie, realizes she forgot something in her car, so she excuses herself, telling everyone, "I'll be right back." The others continue having fun, but realize Angie's been gone for a while. So one of the other women, let's just call her Holly, says, "I'm going to go check and see what the problem is." And she gets up and also heads out to the car. As Holly's walking to the car, she sees Angie standing next to the car with some dude talking to her. Holly calls Angie's name a couple of times, but Angie doesn't respond. As Holly gets closer, she sees that this guy is leaning in towards Angie, like he's going to give her a hug. Holly picks up the pace. When she finally gets to the car, she sees the guy's face and mouth open with a row of jagged, sharp teeth. As soon as she sees the teeth, the guy shoots up straight into the air and disappears. Angie does not remember any of this. Her memory goes straight from walking toward the car to Holly standing next to her. They decide to call the police, thinking maybe someone slipped some drugs into her drink or something. The cops ask him, "Tall? Amber color eyes?" Holly says, "Yeah, that's the guy." The cops tell him, "You're not the first call we've had about this guy. He's the real deal." Or this account from a Reddit user we'll call Beth. It's 2001, and Beth, who's 14, goes to New Orleans for her birthday. She's a huge Anne Rice fan and absolutely in love with vampires. So a trip to New Orleans is a no-brainer. Beth's last night there, she and her dad go to the river walk, and Beth starts getting this creepy feeling like somebody's watching her. Freaked out, she and her dad turn around and head back to the hotel. Later, driving out of the French Quarter, they both spot a man walking so fast his coat is flaring up. He's well dressed with long hair tied back in a low ponytail, but he doesn't look like he's dressed right, either for the summer temperatures or for the time period. Dad says, maybe he's a vampire, and speeds up to get a closer look. The guy looks right at Beth and smiles at her. Beth instantly gets a weird feeling in the pit of her stomach and starts to panic, telling her dad, "Just go, just drive." They both watch as the guy crosses the street behind them and just starts flying up into the air. Dad lets fly a few colorful words, whips the car around, and they both start looking for him. But he's gone. Or this account from YouTuber Cedric Whitaker from the channel The Demon's Tea Room with Cedric Whitaker. He tells the tale of a good friend of his who Cedric didn't want to name, so we're going to call him Joe. About 4 or 5 years ago, Joe fulfills his lifelong dream of leaving the rat race of Manhattan behind for a bartending gig at Napoleon House in the French Quarter. Now, this guy is like 6'3" or 6'4", long blonde hair and full sleeve tattoos. Total Harley dude vibe. And this guy does not believe in the paranormal. If you tell him you just got slapped across the face by a ghost, he'll tell you, lay off the crack pipe. So Cedric gets a call from Joe around 3:30 in the morning. "Cedric, I need you in the quarter. I need you here now." 7 minutes later, Cedric's there and finds Joe 3 blocks away from Napoleon House, sitting on the sidewalk in a fetal position, rocking back and forth, sweating bullets. Cedric, not having any idea of what could possibly send this tough guy friend into this kind of an emotional spiral, just kind of casually approaches him and says, "What's up, man?" Joe says, "I'm going to tell you the story, and I know that if you were telling it to me, I would call you a bold-faced liar." And he goes on to tell Cedric that he was shutting the bar down. He has all the doors closed and locked except for one that's closed but not locked. He goes in the back and starts counting out his till to get ready to shut the bar down for the night. when he hears something out in the front room. It sounds like glass bottles hitting together or like glasses clinking. Joe goes out in the front to see what's going on and sees what looks like a 12 or 13-year-old little girl standing on the bar with her back to him, dancing around the bottles. He yells, "Yo, kid, get the hell off my bar. You're gonna get me in trouble." The little girl turns around, jet black eyes, mouth full of sharp teeth, takes a single step off the bar like it's nothing, and starts walking toward Joe. Joe, knowing a predator when he sees one, keeps eye contact with it and backs out the door. He tells Cedric, "That was not a little girl, and I'm not going back." Joe moves out of the city less than 6 hours later and refuses to ever return. Interestingly enough, Cedric also claims to have 3 affidavits from military police officers assigned to the city of New Orleans in the aftermath of Katrina for rescue operations. They say they received direct orders to load up a convoy, head out to the airport, pick up some people, escort them back to the Ursuline Convent, ensure that they were unimpeded during their investigation, then load them back up, get them back to the airport, and see them off. Okay, pair that with the manifest for that flight from that day, which Cedric says is also in his possession, which gives the flight's point of origin as Italy, the Vatican. So the question is, what is so important on the 3rd floor of the Ursuline Convent that not only does the United States military pull rescue workers and first responders off disaster operations when they still have people stranded on their roofs, but the Vatican sends some of its highest-ranking officials into a disaster zone to investigate a building that's the subject of what's supposed to be nothing but legend and lore? Funny, nobody's answering that question. But Cedric does have one piece of advice for anyone thinking of visiting New Orleans. If you happen to be walking by the Ursuline Convent, and you look up and you see any one of those 3rd floor dormer windows open, leave. It means the vampires are out hunting. Special shout out to Cedric Whitaker with the Demon's Tea Room. He used to be a tour guide in New Orleans, and it shows. He is an awesome storyteller. Check out his channel if you want to hear more creepy stories about New Orleans. If you want to stick around and explore more creepy stories of legend and lore, click right here. Come on, we're having so much fun. Be careful out there. And I will see you here again on the In-Between.